Well, thank you very much for joining me on this video. Some time ago, the province of Ontario identified two specific problems, both connected with housing, that they felt they had a partial solution for. The first problem was availability. The fact was, and especially in the Golden Horseshoe, the vacancy rate for apartments or houses for rent was less than 2%. That's really good for landlords, but it's not great for tenants. The second problem was affordability. When I say affordability, I'm not talking about affordability of rent. I'm talking about people who owned their own home and were having a difficult time maintaining the expenses connected with it. They were house rich because property had gone up so much in value, even with the settling in prices in the last while. If you look over the last 7 years, prices have more than doubled in Ontario, certainly. And so people were sitting on a lot of equity in their houses, but they were on limited income in many cases and were having a hard time paying for taxes and utilities and the cost of living. This was especially difficult for seniors who were on fixed incomes, and especially seniors where one had passed away and the other was struggling with reduced pensions coming in. Or single parents where one spouse had left and the other was trying to maintain the household, looking after the children, and limited and reduced in their income. And so they needed to try and find some way of solving the problem. And what the government did was they passed legislation, sweeping legislation, that affected the entire province of Ontario, regardless of what municipality you're in, and regardless of the zoning you're in, that would permit you to have ancillary dwelling within your building or within your house that you could rent out. You could be in an R1 zoning, permitted single family only, and you could rent out the basement as a separate apartment. In fact, you didn't even have to have a separate entrance. You could have the person come through your kitchen and go down into the basement, and that was permitted. It didn't have to be a duplex in configuration. Now, having said that, some of the municipalities embraced it. They thought it was a great idea because they recognized there was a shortage of housing. Other municipalities felt it was a muddying of their zoning and they didn't like it. They didn't like having duplexes in very prestigious single-family zoned areas. And while they couldn't stop it, what they could do is enact bylaws that could curtail it to somewhat, and they did. And in some cases, the bylaws restricted the size of the square footage of the unit. In St. Catharines, as an example, the restriction was 633 square feet maximum, or 40% of the floor area. Now, if you happen to have a bungalow, your basement level would be the square footage of the main floor. It's going to be larger than 633 square feet, but you'd subtract out the stairwell and the furnace area and some of the common areas. It still might be very difficult to fit into the restrictions that they placed. However, bear in mind that most municipalities are reactive. They're not proactive. They're not looking for reasons to shut units down, and they're going to act on complaints only. But there are those restrictions. And the other restriction I want to bring your attention to is fire retrofit legislation. Although it doesn't, and I'm not really concerned about self-closing doors, so on, but two things I am concerned about. One is smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, and you want to make sure that these ancillary dwellings have adequate smoke and fire detectors, carbon monoxide detectors. And the other thing is that anything, and especially in a basement unit, anything that's designated as a bedroom must have a window that somebody can crawl out of. The picture is waking up in the night, smell of smoke, open your bedroom door, you're greeted with a wall of flame. If you're in a downstairs basement apartment and your bedroom has no window, you've got no way out. So that room can be a den, can be a study, can be storage room, can't be a bedroom. So be careful very much about this. But having said that, meeting those two things, you can rent it out as an ancillary dwelling. Some municipalities allow it to be freestanding, and you can convert a garage into a dwelling. Some don't. It has to be within the exterior walls of the occupied premises itself. But the thing I want to make sure you understand as an investor in real estate is that this is not a duplex. The legislation didn't create duplexes. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that the owner of the property must be an occupant of the property in order for the ancillary dwelling to exist. It's a little bit like home offices or home businesses. Home businesses were designed for the person who was the owner of the property, who lived there, and they wanted to have a nail salon or a beauty salon or a doctor's office or something within the property that they owned, and they had a zoning especially for that. This allows that as long as the owner is there. If the owner sells and the person who buys isn't moving in, if they're an investor, then it's no longer legal and it can be shut down. I've seen a lot of this, especially semi-detached, because of the price point. It made it affordable, and people were taking the lower level and making it an apartment and renting it out, and then they were selling it as though it were a duplex. And the person who bought it was looking at cash flow, they're looking at cap rate, they said this is very affordable, it makes sense, and they bought it, but they aren't buying a duplex. They're buying a single family home or single semi-detached home. And as long as they understand that, and as they understand that it can be shut down, understand what you're getting. So they call them granny flats because they're not a duplex. Need you to be aware of it. If you're living in a home and you want additional income, it's something that you need to take a good look at because it can be very, very helpful. If you're an investor looking at buying a duplex, be careful. Understand what you're buying. Thank you very much for joining me in this video. I look forward to talking to you again next week.